Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Here's one of our favorite conversations about what's happening in the city.
While news about ICE's actions in the Twin Cities has slowed recently, operations continue. Those operations have also spilled over the state's border into western Wisconsin. Over the past few months, agents have been detaining people and, in some cases, children. To date, this is the most widespread ICE operation in Wisconsin. Last month, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reporter Sophie Carson spent time around the area talking with community members about ICE's presence and how the community is responding. She joins WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez to share what she found along the Wisconsin-Minnesota border.
Sophie, welcome back from your reporting trip to western Wisconsin. You visited a bunch of spots, but one town in particular called Baldwin with a population just over 4,000, which dubs itself the biggest little town in Wisconsin. When you visited, it sounded like it was almost a ghost town, though.
The streets were quite empty. We were there in the middle of a weekday, so in general, it would be fairly empty. But the thing that was notable was just how many apartment buildings and homes had been vacated. We followed this woman, Denise Flaherty, around. She's a volunteer who knows a lot about the community, and she was really able to point out just how many places were empty now that immigrants had fled because of immigration enforcement.
I would encourage everyone to read your piece and the profile you do on Denise, she's like a rapid response team onto herself when it comes to immigrants and taking care of the folks in her community. And her background a little bit, which you got into, is she's a retiree from corporate America. She doesn't speak any Spanish. In the past, it doesn't sound like she'd advocated for immigrant rights before. So can you tell me a little bit about Denise and the work she's doing and how she got started doing this?
Definitely. She told me before a year or two ago, she never even thought about the issue of immigration, which is sort of interesting. She lived in the Twin Cities. Now she lives on a farm about 40 miles east of the Twin Cities outside Baldwin, but she really got connected to a couple families through a food donation program, and she took it from there and started seeing the effects of immigration enforcement and the sort of fear around that on so many families. You know, people too scared to leave their homes, kids not going to school, people needing rides to work, and just the challenges that come with not being okay with driving places in a small town that obviously doesn't have any public transportation, doesn't have very many social services, doesn't have an immigration advocacy organization. So she's taken it on herself. And when I sort of asked her about why she was doing this, she just basically said that it was, how could she not? You know, she saw what was going on, and how could she not help? So I thought that was sort of interesting.
The other thing that you get into with her is the network that they've built up in just a couple months' time and the challenges of doing it in like a rural space in rural western Wisconsin, which doesn't have the same population or resources as, say, Twin Cities or Chicago or Milwaukee. So what were the challenges, particularly in a place like Baldwin or that area, that they have to navigate on a regular basis?
Yeah, well, one difference from what's going on in the Twin Cities is that the population density is much higher in the Twin Cities. So there's people sort of rushing out of their homes to take videos of ICE agents, you know. But in Baldwin, it's Denise and some other volunteers driving around, you know, messaging on apps saying someone was spotted here or this person needs help. And so it's mostly in Baldwin and Hudson, like retirees, stay-at-home moms, and then people sort of driving around after work to help people and gather donations, things like that.
In a companion piece, you do talk about Hudson and some of the very shocking ways I think that agents are detaining immigrants and undocumented folks. There's the video that you all linked to of the 12-year-old girl getting picked up while they were grocery shopping. Her and her family were grocery shopping.
Shame on you. Shame.
So Hudson is maybe, one of the biggest towns in the St. Croix area, in this area in western Wisconsin. And the police chief, Jeff Williams, said that the department would continue to work with ICE even after what's been happening within the area. And Hudson's Mayor Rich O'Connor recently shut down public comments on public concerns about sharing information with ICE. What do we know about what's happening with ICE and ICE operations in Wisconsin currently?
Basically, in western Wisconsin, it seems that, police are continuing to say they're going to work with ICE. There are not, beyond western Wisconsin, sort of major citywide operations, sort of roving operations, picking up anyone on the street. That's not necessarily the case in Milwaukee, or Madison, although we do, of course, every day have several reports of people getting picked up by ICE agents. But in general, western Wisconsin is sort of this unique case because it is next to the Twin Cities, and in the advocates' view in the Hudson area, one of the reasons Hudson and Baldwin are so targeted by ICE is that the agents are staying in hotels in those two towns. They're sort of just in the area already. They can sort of drive around and easily arrest individuals, although, of course, this is what the advocates say, and ICE did not say it would comment on any operations.
Thinking of these small towns in rural spaces who this could be a large part of their economy, I'm curious, what does this mean, having ICE and sustained ICE operations in places like this that may be a little bit more reliant on immigrant labor?
It's definitely a good question, and something I think remains a major concern for this area in terms of the economy. I mean, across rural Wisconsin, immigrants make up a huge portion of the dairy workers. Manufacturing plants rely on workers and staffing to do undesirable jobs like overnight shifts, holiday shifts, dirty jobs like cleaning the stalls on dairy farms. And what has been the case in western Wisconsin is that business owners have had trouble filling shifts if people are too afraid to come to work. And then otherwise they've been trying to schedule rides to get workers to their plants. But it is sort of a major concern economically for that region.
There's one person that you wrote about, and his name's Dario, owns a grocery store. And I think his story, if you don't mind sharing, kind of really gets to the community need to have a Mexican grocery store, a culturally relevant grocery store, and kind of the growth that he was going through, and then also how now his entire business operation is in a state of limbo, and he doesn't know what's going to happen next. So can you tell us about Dario?
Yeah, definitely. So he's sort of an interesting case. He's been in the community of Baldwin a very long time, and he just said it's such a small town. He never, ever expected this to happen in Baldwin. But he has video of two people being arrested outside his shop, and that has created a lot of fear. Before ICE came to the Twin Cities in western Wisconsin, his business was doing so well that he was starting to build a restaurant in the back of his grocery store. And when I visited, there's drills going on in the background, there's hammering. They were a week away from opening, and the store was empty, and they keep the front door locked to let people in who do venture out. But he really is unsure about what to do next because he wants to open the restaurant. He basically said, there's no going back. I mean, I've invested all this money. I've built the restaurant. But he doesn't know, even if he does open the restaurant, unlocks the doors to let in customers if they could be, maybe say, ICE agents in hiding. There's this really pervasive fear, even for someone like him who's lived in the community for 20 years, that a real sense of uncertainty about what's next.
Thinking about all the reporting that you did and how you've connected with employers and following Denise and, multiple towns and kind of like what they're seeing, this was not a hop, skip, and jump away from you. Like, this was a pretty ambitious trip that you took out there to kind of document what was happening. Now that you're back in Milwaukee and the Twin Cities have their reporters, but they have their hands full on reporting on this, who is going to be following up with people like Denise and what's happening in Hudson and Baldwin and rural western Wisconsin? How do those stories continue to get told, or do we just not hear about what happens next?
I'd like to continue telling those stories. I think the challenge of being a news reporter in a rural area is that there's a lot to cover, and a lot of it is difficult to uncover because immigrant families are so afraid to speak in that area. They're just very nervous. So writing the story was an interesting challenge because I didn't want to sort of violate anyone's privacy, and I didn't want to make it so that ICE would follow any of the people I spoke to, But Denise, she said, ICE already knows who she is, which is sort of an interesting challenge. But it continues to be a story. I mean, in the Twin Cities area, I think there's still several hundred ICE agents working. And in western Wisconsin, they continue to say that people are being picked up and that the ICE agents are in the area. And I think the next story is really about, detention, habeas corpus petitions, and whether people are going to be released from custody and what the lasting impact on those towns is, because there is so much movement away from those towns to elsewhere in Wisconsin, elsewhere in the country, even back to people's home countries.
Sophie Carson has been reporting on ICE operations in western Wisconsin for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. She spoke about it with WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. Lake Effect is WUWM's talk show all about what's happening in the city. If you want to hear more conversations like this, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast, and you'll hear highlights from the show. If you want to hear the full show, it's on the radio at noon, Monday through Friday, on 89.7.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.